Welcome to this week's OK at Work with myself, Sarah Sawyer, and my colleague, Russell Berger, both attorneys at Offit Kurman. And today we are talking about remote workers, but a little bit of a different angle on this topic. I know we've talked about it in a couple different circumstances here on OK at Work in a couple different ways. But often, we see our clients will have a key employee or someone that they really like who wants to move. And maybe the company doesn't really have a remote workforce. Everyone's pretty much local. They work in person or they all work in the same region. But they've got this employee that it's like, well, I really like this employee. They've got to move for one reason or another. So, all right, I want to let them work remote, even though they're moving to X state, far away, California, whatever it may be. What are some things that employers should be considering, Russell, when making a decision about letting a one-off employee work remotely somewhere far away from the office?
Yeah, well, the first couple of questions are, where are they going and what laws do I now have to comply with? So in the example you just gave, the person's moving across the country to California. California's got a lot of different employment laws than, even, on the East Coast states. So, you could be taking on a lot more obligation, a lot more burden. You want to know that before you even consider signing off. What am I stepping into, and am I willing to do it for this employee? And then the second kind of threshold question, I think, is, can this person do this job remotely? Does this work? I might have to change some things, sure, but can we get effective productivity? Is it worth it? So if okay, fine, I'll deal with the greater compliance of the state they're moving to, or it's not greater compliance obligations, but I still have to set up unemployment and workers' comp and all this stuff. I'm willing to take that administrative burden, fine. Um, can I do it? Will this work? Will I get a return on the headache of setting someone up in a different state, or would I be better off just saying, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. If you ever move back, give me a call, but I'd be better off, recruiting someone local.
Yeah, and then there's the practical considerations as well. So a lot of folks will say, all right, all those burdens, right? The administrative burdens, I've got to figure out what laws apply and the taxes and all those things. Well, then after you get through all of that, it's like, all right, well, now we're managing this employee who's now remote, and maybe you think their job is doable remotely, but then you've got to manage them, you've got to supervise them, you've got to make sure that they're still doing the things that they are doing otherwise. They're adjusting, things are changing. So another thing to consider as well is making sure you have a job description for that person if you don't already, so that there's clear instructions on, well, you're still going to be expected to do X, Y, and Z even when you're there. Here's how we're going to adapt this thing that maybe, sometimes there's things within the job description that are more easily done in person, or might involve meeting with other people. Well, here's the expectation as it relates to having those meetings virtually or doing these tasks virtually instead of in person. So there might be some adjustments that need to be made to the role. So that's one thing I would definitely recommend doing. And then another one is having a remote work policy. So if a company doesn't generally have remote employees and then they have a one-off remote employee, they may not have policies in place. And also your remote work policies when someone goes far away from the office and works remote versus working in the same state might differ depending on, of course, the laws of that state where they're going, but also any travel requirements of traveling back to where the office is physically located, things like that. So there are additional considerations, even if you have a remote work policy for your local workforce, that you may need to also consider if someone's going farther away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are all good points. And to kind of piggyback on the job description aspect of it, I mean, like we always say in various contexts here, like, have a plan. If someone's going to be working remotely, figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, how it's going to look different, how you're going to manage it, how they're going to interact and engage with employees that might be managing them, or they might be managing that are now, in a virtual world as opposed to an in-person world. Um, think about all these things before you sign off and approve this. And then you manage and you make sure the employee knows about it. so that they know what's expected of them, even though they're working in a remote fashion. And the policy is a good way to do it. But even in the details that wouldn't go into a policy, make sure they know, and you have that conversation with them and you explain the expectations. As we always say, document it, whether it's a follow-up email or however you do that, and then hold people accountable to it. And it might even be a manager that's saying, I really want to keep this person, even though they're going to be remote. Then you hold the manager accountable to managing the remote employee. But I think it's really important that you have a plan, you stick to it, and you check in on it, and you manage it. In addition to the complying with the local laws, setting up payroll properly, ensuring that there is a remote work policy that's being followed. Those technical aspects as well.
Yeah, and as far as a plan, and you touched on this a little bit with the manager, also, but also just the communication to any other team members when this team member or employee goes and moves somewhere, while setting the expectations for the team and what they should be expecting and letting them know how this new situation is going to operate is also important. I mean, a lot of times people will move and there's a time difference where they live, right? So the California example, for instance, if you're moving East Coast to West Coast, are you setting expectations around meeting times and things like that, and letting the team know, well, you should still expect this person to be available, things like that. So always good to, as part of the plan, also look at who else is impacted and how you're going to manage the folks who are local who might be working with that person as well.
Right.
Well, thanks, Russell. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Sarah.